Okay, let's hop on over to the United States. We're seeing this common theme about this kind of a paranoia of spies and who else is going to be there. You don't know who's going to be listening. So here it is. If you use careless talks, you're actually helping the Nazis. Now, an interesting thing that the United States was doing, and other countries did this too, but not to the extent of the United States. We see comic books get in on the action. And we'll also see later on cartoons get in on the action. And this is because um, the people in power at the time understood that children have a huge influence on their parents. And if you can plant the seed there, it then filters upward as opposed to coming from the parents downward. So here you see Captain America fighting a devilish looking Japanese soldier. Okay. Again, we're seeing some really terrible stereotypes here. Um, God, especially the depictions of the Japanese in this, they're pretty awful. Here we see Superman with Hitler and the Emperor. And you can see that they're really just trying to, you know, involve these uh, things that kids adore into the propaganda machine. But we also see favorites, some editorial cartoonists that get in on the action too. Now, these aren't necessarily aimed at kids, these are more aimed at adults. But Dr. Seuss was a pretty prominent editorial cartoonist at this time. Keep in mind that he was a German Jew. His real name is Theodor Geisel. And once the Nazis began to rise, he actually changed his pen name to Theo Lessig, which is actually Geisel backwards, to sound less German. And then he assumed the moniker Dr. Seuss. But he was pushing for American intervention long before we actually uh, entered World War II and entered the fray, because he saw what was happening in Germany. He knew what was happening to the Jewish people and was creating cartoons to kind of push people to adopt a more interventionist attitude. Oops. It's interesting to see this style that we kind of grew up with reading, and even the phrasing here in such an completely different context. Said a bird in the midst of a blitz. Up to now, they've scored very few hits. Oh, I'll sit on my canny, old star-spangled fanny. And on it he sits and he sits. So this is really just talking about Americans pretending nothing is really happening because it's so far away. Saul Steinberg is another famous cartoonist that was pretty active in his commentary on the war. So here we see Hitler and his subordinates looking at this wonderful thing that he's showing off to the Germans, but it's really built on stilts and very tentative in its construction. Here we have all of the Axis powers, shows kind of depictions of them as, clownish caricatures of themselves, leading each other all to their own deaths. Yay. Now let's look at more traditional propaganda that you might be familiar with. Here we see Private Joe Louis, who was a boxer. Uh, we're going to do our part and win because we're on God's side. So this is not just, transfer of, someone who's respected, but he's also drawing in on religion. And I mean, he's a very famous person, much like uh, Elvis Presley went to war. So did Joe Louis, and it was kind of the same thing. But of course, Elvis didn't go till much later because that was the Korean War. Anyway, here we see famous people going to war, and the government really kind of monopolizing that. Now we see this. Um, it's this poster is often confused with Rosie the Riveter, but it's the "We Can Do It" poster, and it's making a commentary on unifying everybody doing their part, women entering factories and doing men's work. That was in air quotes. You can't see that. Men's work um, while they're off at war. Now, she became kind of this iconic figure of feminism and equality of the sexes, and you'll still see her used to this day. But I want to make sure that you aren't confusing this with the actual Rosie the Riveter, a Norman Rockwell painting that was on the post cover here. Still both very strong images of women in the workforce when that was very atypical. Here's the complete flip side of that. Gee, I wish I were a man. I'd join the Navy. Oh, gosh. So, this is kind of playing on, men's masculinity and identity, trying to get people to sign up because, hey, even this woman would do it if she could, you know, kind of you know a relic of its time, really. These were pretty famous posters that ran in different magazines as well. X-rays of Hitler's brain and Mussolini's brain and Hirohito's brain. And when you look into them, you see Liberty shackled, powder kegs, serpent with swastikas, guns, matches, noose, all of these very terrible things, right? Same thing with Mussolini's brain, except of course he has Hitler on his mind, which was the big the the joke, that he just wanted to be Hitler so much. And here we go inside Hirohito's cutthroat. So sorry, please. Dunce, says the Allies. Make me so mad, I'm going right out into the backyard and eat worms. Insane. We are the superior race. So here we have, at the bottom of them, just stereotypes that are being pushed and reinforced. Remember that propaganda is all about reinforcing stereotypes that are either created or pre existing, repeating it until it becomes believed. Loose lips might sink ships. We've heard that one. Here's the poster. Here we have the evil other. Now, this is actually detailing, oh gosh, the Bataan Death March, where we see just after a 3-month battle, the Americans backing up the Filipinos, that they're marched 60 plus miles with no food, no drink, and you estimates range from 5,000 to 18,000 people were killed on the march itself. Really, really awful stuff. And I want you to check out this. This is what people looked like after the the march, 6 day march, and it was extremely brutal. Okay, they would only have about 3 hours of sleep uh, per night. If they fell out of line, they would be speared or decapitated or even crucified with bayonets. Tanks were running over people's corpses as they fell out of line. And this was later determined to be a war crime, but I mean, I can't even imagine the brutality that and just the imagery of this all. Is after 6 days that some people were reported to be just a few inches thick. You know, they were essentially eating, if they got any food at all, it was this gruel that was filled with maggots and rot. Oof. Anyway, let's get back to the more lighthearted ones. Swastika marks the spot. Keep them firing. Do your part. Do your rationing. Now, this is interesting. Times Person of the Year. And we still see this as something that is, uh, a venerated and notable uh, acknowledgement, I guess. Now, time has made it very clear, time and time again, that the person of the year is not necessarily, a force of good or anything like that, but it is the person that has the most influence over that year. And in 1938, you see that it was Hitler, and then in 1945 again, you can see that the portrayal is much different, right? Old FDR. Now I end on that one to show you this, the Japanese depiction of FDR as a Frankenstein monster, and we'll pick up on that in the next installment.